So today I'm going to talk about the G Suite for Education and then how that interacts with the maker mindset and STEM classes and all that good stuff. Oops. I'm just going to turn off my camera. I don't know if it's working anyway, so maybe this will be a little bit better. So our agenda for today, I'm going to talk about just a little bit about G Suite for Education. I think it's just fantastic and does a lot of good things. I'm going to talk about how I kind of got into out of the mode of the way I used to teach, how I teach now, and then this maker mindset, what it is, how to do it yourself, what it looks like, and how it intertwines with the G Suite for Education. Okay. All right. Thanks for being here. Here we go. So the first thing I'll talk about is just a couple of quick commercials for Google. I am a Google certified educator. I'm a level 1 educator. Taking the test provided me with the confidence to try new things without having to be worried that I was going to fall flat on my face. So if you are new to these things, please explore this. It's a great way to, on your own time, figure out the G Suite for Education. And since you're spending your Saturday with us, there is a promo code EDU on Air GCE Level 1. It's only $5. Can't beat that. Best deal ever. I will just give a quick shout out to Google Certified Innovators. My principal at our East Campus is a Google Certified Innovator. So a big shout out to Mr. Jason Markey. It's awesome. It really provides creative confidence for the whole school district to have a leader in that position. But you can think about yourself as a teacher, if you're really interested in being innovative and trying new things, this is a great program to walk through. All right, so I am checking the Google account like crazy for your questions. So I can see we're in Honduras and Mexico. So a big shout out to Tulsa, Oklahoma. Also, keep the questions coming. I'm gonna be checking this and I'll adapt. My time here is for you. It's not for me. So I'll be checking your questions to see how I could better adapt what I'm gonna present with you today. All right, so that's the housekeeping. A little bit about me. My name is Frank Holthaus. I'm the Director of Careers and Community Outreach for Leiden High School. This is my 11th year teaching. I'm in an administrative role this year, which is kind of weird. But for the past 10 years, I've been a teacher in the classroom, teaching our industrial technology area. And if you're not sure what industrial technology is, I don't blame you. It's kind of this niche position. But these would be like your automotive classes, your construction classes. But specifically for me, I taught metals. I taught our engineering classes for Project Lead the Way, home repair, CAD. It's been a great experience teaching. I kind of miss it already. If you do have questions throughout this event, I know I got the questions up, but in the long term, that's my email address. That's my Twitter handle. I just want to talk briefly about Leiden. Leiden's a great school district. I am so fortunate to get to work there. It is a privilege. We have 3,600 students. Really diverse. In our hallways, we have over 36 different languages that are spoken. Not all of our students are financially stable. We have some low income students. We have some dynamic family situations. And so keep that in mind as I present this. These are students who maybe haven't had every opportunity before walking in the doors of Leiden. And, I see it as my job as to open up as many doors as possible. All right, so here we go. Shop class. So again, you can think of me as a shop teacher. And so sometimes that gets it's like a negative connotation. That is not the case. The shop class is, if you think about a really good functioning shop class, it is the maker mindset happening in action. But if we think about the world now, it's not the way it was in the 60s and the 70s, right? We need to create a shop class for the 21st century. And I think the maker mindset gets us there. It talks about curiosity and collaboration and problem solving, that grit. So it kind of removes the teacher from that role of the lecturer in a way that I'm going to talk about. But first, let me talk about Thanksgiving. So if you've heard of the Danielson model, it's like a teacher professional development model. In the state of Illinois, it's actually used for evaluation. This happened about 3 years ago when we went over the Danielson model. And there's these different levels. The top level is called distinguished. So if you were to have a distinguished Thanksgiving, this is what it would look like. The turkey, which has been growing free range in your backyard, comes to your house, jumps in the oven. The guests who wrote to ask to be invited to your house show up early with foods that fit all dietary and cultural needs. You watch the football game on tape, but only as a video prompt for your family to discuss, for your family's discussion of man's inhumanity to man. Your family plays 6 Degrees of Sir Francis Bacon and is thus able to resolve once and for all the issue of whether Oswald acted alone. So, yeah, it's kind of hilarious, right? That literally describes the bar of the Danielson model. And specifically, Danielson 3C is all about student engagement. It's a big focus. So for myself as an educator, when this came out, I really started to reflect and refine the way I taught. How did I drive student engagement? How did I drive home this new bar that was set for me as an educator? And that kind of brought me down this journey that I'm going to share with you. So the way I was trained was to present content, generally through lecture method, then guide my students through a highly structured lab. So you could think of, my engineering class, there was only one way that this could break. I knew all about it, I'd studied it, and I could talk about it even more. And then at the end of the unit, we're gonna give you a multiple choice test. You're gonna take it, hopefully you do pretty good, and you're gonna evaluate and you're gonna repeat, right? So we go over for the next unit and we start over and we start over. And I can guarantee you that, yeah, my students get a 98% in that unit. And what does that mean, that 98%? Does that mean that they have it forever, that they're now experts? And no, what I found going through this is the lecture portion was highly disengaging for my students. The structured lab had an expected outcome that you could almost guess. And the evaluations were really meaningless, right? What could you retain in your short-term memory? But if I were to ask students at the end of the year in that final exam, their scores were lower because they didn't really retain it. So that was kind of the problem I was at. And if you're a teacher like this, this really is the solution I hope for you. But I decided to try something new. So here's where I start to talk about the different projects I've been, but this is the first thing I dived into. So a quick shout out to the Enable group. It's a great group of volunteers from all different walks of life. Some people are really good at 3D modeling and 3D printing. Other people have medical knowledge. They all come together. They actually have a Google Plus group that they all hang out in, and they drive innovation in the world of prosthetics. So on the left here, this girl's name is Ruby. You can see her right hand's deformed. She needs a prosthetic. If you know anything about kids, I have a couple myself. They grow, then they grow fast. And so a prosthetic is also quite expensive, a standard prosthetic through a doctor. By the way, I will post that certification code again at the end, absolutely 100%. And so that Raptor model is just a designed hand. It has elastic cords on the top. It has fixed length cords on the bottom. And if you bend your wrist, that hand actually grasps. So it's very functional. And it's also pretty low tech. It's plastic, it's elastic, and some prosthetic foam on the inside. And you could print one of those for about $30. So what happened was my principal, Will Wagner, who since retired, was on an airplane flight sitting next to this guy. And they got towards the end of the flight and he took this hand out of the bag. They sparked up a conversation. Turned out he was in a neighboring town. Our principal invited him over to the school. He was very intrigued by the whole story of prosthetic hands. Me being the engineering teacher, I was invited to that meeting as well. And it was a fantastic experience because I got to meet someone who was directly involved with the Enable group. I immediately went back to my classroom. I signed up to do a trial of the hand to make sure that I had the equipment, that I had the knowledge, and I was able to do it successfully. Once I proved that, working with the Enable organization, I committed to making 12 of these. I, of course, wasn't making the 12, my students were. So I thought, I'm like, how can I integrate this into my curriculum in an authentic way that I'm still teaching the content I want to, but I also still want to do this service learning project because I think it's very valuable. And so I was taking a risk. This was my first big jump. And so what I found out, in this project in particular, being an engineering teacher, I taught the design software that this model was designed off of. So we had a big thing called parametric controls that scales the hand in different ways. So you can think about the same shoe being delivered in different sizes, a size 7 shoe versus a size 12 shoe. Similarly, this hand is scaled in all sorts of different ways, and that's controlled parametrically. And so I got to teach that. I'd naturally teach that, and I seized that opportunity within this project. Secondly, our students were able to create custom parts themselves for the recipient. Every recipient had a different deformation or need, and our students would address that. It was a student-led project. They would report weekly to the recipient and email them, say where they were, what difficulty they had, and when they could expect their hand. It also customized their hands. We had different colors. Some hands had nails. Some hands had nail polish on them. And what I discovered is, man, that real audience, that real purpose created very high student engagement. Students were inviting themselves, just to think about that Danielson Thanksgiving, students were inviting themselves into my classroom during their lunch. They were staying after school. They were so driven during the class period. It was amazing. And that really opened my eyes to a new way of thinking. And that is what I call the maker mindset. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how I got to that point. That project definitely drew my interest. After that, I started doing some professional development in project-based learning. I got to go out to San Francisco and do some design thinking. And I'm also a certified project lead the way teacher. But if we walk through the 3 of these methodologies just briefly, I think it's going to help out a lot. So first, project-based learning is all about inquiry, having a deep driving question that has multiple paths to it, getting research done to get what you need to know to move forward, providing choice and voice to students, being able to critique and revise. And when I first read that originally as a teacher, it kind of made me cringe a little bit, to publicly ask students to critique and revise if it's good, if it kind of works. But that's something that we learn to embrace. And then finally, having a public audience. And the public audience piece is huge. I'll talk about that a lot. Now, if you think about, the Stanford D School and their design thinking process, it is to empathize with the end user, with the builder, really to wrap your head around what they're going through and what their experience is like. To be able to clearly and definitively define the problem and what their task is in relation to that problem. Being able to ideate, come up with as much as you can, not shooting anything down, creating a functional prototype, testing it, and then this is a reciprocal relationship, starting over again as that test comes out. If you look at the Project Lead the Way design process of defining a problem, generating concepts, developing a solution, prototyping, evaluating the solution, and presenting it with that arrow going back to the beginning, this iterative process, you can see that's also the same. So if we were to look at like a Venn diagram of these 3 things, there's a lot of overlap, and that's kind of what the maker mindset's all about. Be present, connect, and create. If you do those 3 things as a teacher, you're on the right page. So here's a maker mindset. So the first thing, the lesson planning, the work, the big linchpin of this all is the big messy problem. You need a big messy problem. I say messy on purpose. It has to be a complex problem. It has to be something that has multiple pathways. And of course, the real challenge here is finding the skills that you're trying to teach, right? You as a teacher probably have some course objectives you need to hit. So you want to make sure that this project could potentially address those objectives. You might not get to all of them, and we have to be okay with that as a teacher. But you should be able to get to most if you have a decent, big, messy problem. Once you have that in place and you presented that to the students, you provide opportunities for them to do your research, to really dive deep into it, to develop their own concepts, or brainstorm, as most of us call it. If you haven't taught students how to brainstorm, I highly recommend it. And the next thing would be to build. The ideas are easy, especially when they're crazy ideas, right? the building really brings it back to reality. And it also, I think, creates new problems. So problems you weren't thinking of before, when you go to implement it in reality, you're going to see this real problem, and it creates new things to learn. So it's kind of really interesting to see how far the build takes it. So make it as real as humanly possible. And then finally, do something with it. Test the solution, bring it out to the public audience, bring it to the experts, make it the functional product. Of course, once you do that, there's new problems that arise, right? In reality, in actual use, you're going to see different things change and new things. So you want to iterate. You want to start over and go through this process again as your new problems arise. So what are some ways that we can move forward as a teacher? So if you just heard my maker mindset description, and you're, what do I do today? What can I do today to get into that? Here's some simple steps that will get you along the path. First, start with the big idea before you deliver any content. So before I talk to my students about that fundamental knowledge, I'm going to talk about the big crazy thing they're going to do. That's kind of crazy, but do that first. It's going to provide the context for what they're going to learn next, and it's also going to give that purpose. All right, so it ends up being the hook. It contextualizes the learning, and they know the target that they're working towards as early as possible. The second thing, and I think this is important, no lecturing. What I do is I do offer it to my students as an option, but they have to ask me. They actually have to ask me to lecture on something. And then even still, I don't lecture longer than their age. So if they're freshmen in high school, then I'm not going longer than 14 minutes, ever. And I think that's it's a very passive style of learning. It's very unimaginative. So I try to do that the least amount as possible. Finally, give students freedom. Say yes whenever you humanly can. That's super important. And finally, do something with the final product. That is so important. To make it real for the kids, do something with the final product. All right, so what does this look like in action? Probably one of the best examples I have is this after-school club we call Engineering Club. We make a battle bot. We do this during the whole year. So in the first meeting we have, we talk about, hey, in this club, you are going to build a big fighting robot. So over here, this first picture on the left, that is us working with tiny robots at a smaller scale, learning about programming, learning about coding, and how robots work. Once we did that, we went out and we visited one of the grade school's first robotics clubs, and we worked with them. So our students served as mentors to share what they had learned. What we do is provide opportunities for students to design this battling robot. I step away, and I'm just there kind of as the foreman looking for safety issues. But my students will design and build an entirely functional robot, and I'm just there to make sure that they don't get hurt. So how does that happen? We have students who have been in there for multiple years, have been in our club for more than 1 year, and those students are asked to be student leaders. They'll lead different teams. There's a team that drives the build. There's a team that drives the original concept and blueprints and the design, so they get to kind of drive the vision for the robot. There's a team that does troubleshooting for electronics. And then we have our driving team that actually gets to drive the robot during the battle. And talk about a great public authentic experience. We take this finished battle bot over on the right. This is actually on fight day. We go into this cage and we fight in front of this big public audience. And it actually drives a lot of iteration. Sometimes if we know we're going up against a certain bot, we're going to do something different to our robot. Or if we got beat up really bad, we're going to go back to our pit and we're going to fix ourselves a little bit. So super authentic experience, very few limitations, very student driven. The limitations, by the way, is the weight and batteries. Everyone uses the exact same batteries, and everyone's limited to 80 pounds if it has what we call an active weapon. If it doesn't have a weapon on it, it's 60 pounds. I better keep on going because I'm going out of time. Community projects, another great way. I'll talk a little bit about this sign you see over on the right. That was a reverse engineering project. We had dilapidated park signs. We had our students come up with multiple solutions for new park signs, utilizing different processes and materials. We end up with a CNC cut sign made out of sign foam. It was presented to our Leiden Township board. they had suggestions for us. We implemented those suggestions or iterated. And because of that, we went to full production. We made 7 park signs, and they're still up around the village. So these students have graduated now, but their product is still on public display. Same thing with the one in the center. And those are over on the left, so our students going out to our middle school to connect in front of that as a public audience. Again, going to the build stage is so important. So taking something simple like something you've drawn, something our students would draw on Autodesk Inventor, and coming up with a way to fabricate it. You know, in this case, this was something that had to be made inexpensively, and it had to be made in mass quantity. So having students drive through that and explain that is very, very important. Over here on the left, this was a tweet from one of our students. One of our departments ordered webcams, and the height was all off. So we created a wall mount specifically for that webcam. And of course, I could have done it as a teacher, but it's so much more meaningful having our student go through the design process, work with that department, figure out exactly what they needed, and then implement it. So I will say this, building will take you twice as long as you plan, at least. It takes very long. So this is a counter I made in my digital electronics course. I originally did it on a simulator, and it took me about, I don't know, 30 minutes. It took me about 2 weeks to wire that up. You can see I got new issues, right? Like cable management. It looks like a plate of spaghetti. But it's very, very powerful to take students through the building process because it creates new challenges, real challenges that they're going to face in the field. If you could fabricate at a mass quantity, that's that next layer of iteration. So if you can save a couple of seconds or make something more efficiently or prove that it's slightly better surface quality, you're really driving that next level of iteration. And of course, if you're making something in mass quantity, it's shared, there's some real world audience potential there. This right here is a coaster we made for one of our metal shops. It is really interesting getting to design it and making tool choices and tool path choices. And it took about 7 or 8 different revisions before we got to the final one. And our students really appreciate that opportunity. So how does this interact or intercede with the G Suite for education? I can tell you that things like Google Hangouts are extremely powerful. We have something called Ask the Expert Day. We used to ask our experts to physically come in. We did this in February, and I live in Illinois by Chicago. It snows, and it would snow so much our experts couldn't come in some days. So we started utilizing Google Hangouts, and that's been extremely powerful. We also have distance learning projects, and those are done. Those are done through Google Hangouts. The next thing I should say is that we used to do a paper engineering notebook, and we now have an engineering notebook that will be done, or that is done through Google Docs. Google Docs is extremely powerful. Again, when you make things and fabricate things, then you got to take them apart. So that's like one of our Vex robots on the left-hand side. We need to be able to document that. So we do that documentation, and we take photos with our Chromebooks. We can annotate it with Google Drawings. And so it's really, really powerful to be able to use the G Suite for education. Google Drawings for our products, Google Sheets for some of our calculations. We're able to collaborate. So all of our group work's done within one lab entry within our engineering notebook, which is just a Google Doc. Again, when we used to do paper, it was extremely difficult. And sometimes I'd have students who would lose their engineering notebook, and they'd have to do it over. The next thing I should say is that, hold on just one moment. I'll be there in 5 minutes. Tell them not to do it till 5 o'clock. What? Not till 5. I apologize. Sorry about that. So the next thing is having a big public portfolio, right? That public audience piece is so important. So Google Sites is great for that. It's super convenient. The new Google Sites is fantastic. So make sure that you utilize Google Sites. It's a great public platform, no logins or anything like that. How do I encourage iteration? I have an epic fail and an epic win wall. It's a great way for students to learn grit, celebrate the fails, celebrate the wins. The sooner you fail, the next iteration is going to occur. So when that student's just, down on their luck and not really happy, they encourage them through an epic win, epic fail wall. This was huge for my classroom. Finally, utilize your professional learning network. Twitter is a great resource for it. So tons of hashtags. I will share this presentation so that you guys have it. So I don't feel like you have to know those, but that's just a sampling of all the different hashtags you could follow to learn and grow. And speaking about Twitter and learning and growing, our superintendent chaired the Enable Hand Project. And because of his association that he belongs to, he was invited to the National Week of Making. I got a phone call over the summer and said, hey, I just found out I get to bring a teacher to this National Week of Making. Would you like to attend? And of course I said yes. I don't turn down a trip to the White House. This was a model that we had one of our students create. His name's Fabian. He designed this totally from scratch. This is not downloaded, totally his design. And then we 3D printed it, and the plan was to bring it to Washington, D.C. on our visit. And here's the final product painted. We did a very fabulous job getting it all together. Here's our superintendent, Dr. Poliak, presenting it at the event. And what I really like about this is here's Fabian now. He was listed as 30 under 30. So being a student in high school, he was named as one of the top 30 advanced manufacturing people, industry people in the nation. By the way, he's playing a 3D printed violin there, which I think is just fantastic. So in closing, this is our school motto over at East: be kind, find your passion, and commit to excellence. If you do that and you keep that maker mindset in view, you will do great. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. I am looking at the questions, so if you do have any questions, please let me know. Thank you so much. You can find me on Twitter at fholthouse or Google Plus at Frank Holthouse. Our school district's website is leiden212.org. You can figure out a lot